I'm going to call to order the meeting for CUP 23-0009. My name is Carl Granrath. I'm the hearing examiner this evening. So the purpose of tonight's hearing is for me to gather evidence and testimony that has to do with the matters that are pending, and from everything that I've received tonight, as well as tonight's hearing, that will create the record from which I will make my recommendation to county commissioners. I won't get too long-winded here, seeing as we have a small audience, and I think someone who knows the spiel, knows the deal. So within 2 weeks of tonight, I'll be submitting my recommendation to the county staff, and they'll put it before the county commissioners for their decision. If we do end up with anyone on Zoom, I'll give you a chance to testify then. Otherwise, you've got up to 30 minutes for your presentation. Pretty loose with that. 5 minutes for members of the public. Other than that, I'm going to skip the rest and we'll deal with it as we go. Starting off tonight, we'll have the staff making their report and recommendation.
Good evening, Mr. Hearing Examiner. For the record, Vlad Finkel with Kootenai County Community Development. This is a request by Cielo, the third LLC. The subject request is located east of Highway 41 and on the south side of 16th Avenue. The project consists of approximately 5 gross acres. As you can see, based on the aerial overlay map, the property currently has an existing residence in the northwest corner. However, the majority of the property is currently vacant. The development surrounding this property is both located within the city of Post Falls as well as in the county. There are relatively new apartment complex with multiple structures directly to the west. There is a subdivision to the northwest of the subject property. There is a mobile home park to the south and southwest. There's another one directly to the east of the subject property, and development in the property to the southeast was recently annexed into the city of Post Falls. The property to the north is currently developed with a single-family residential structure. The applicant is proposing a mini storage rental warehouse facility that will comprise of 2 phases. Phase 1 will consist of 7 buildings and 134 units. The existing house will be converted into a rental office. Domestic water supply is and will be provided by Ross Point Water, and effluent discharge is currently being treated with a septic and drain field on site. The second phase will consist of 4 additional buildings and 74 additional units. The total number at full build out is proposed at 208 units, and existing office will be removed and a new clubhouse office will be constructed in its place. These are some of the photos of the property in question. As you can see, it's relatively undeveloped. Looks like just grassland and an existing residence. I'll briefly talk about the zoning and the comp plan designation because it's important to understand what's surrounding this development. The property is currently zoned agricultural. The development to the east and to the south and southwest is high-density residential, and it has both of these parcels are developed with mobile home parks. The property that does not have a color or just has the aerial overlay is all located within the city of Post Falls city limits, to the west, to the northwest, and to the southeast. As I mentioned, there are apartments here, a residential subdivision, as well as a number of commercial businesses along the Highway 41 corridor. The property to the north is zoned agricultural suburban, and it has single-family residence on them. When it comes to comprehensive plan, the subject property is currently designated as border. Parcels to the southwest as well as to the east and to the north are all border as well. Everything that does not have a color, just an aerial overlay, is within the city limits of City of Post Falls. As you know, the border designation is primarily to reserve parcels that are adjacent to city limits for future annexation, and development should be restricted to very minor uses that are very low in intensity that could easily be annexed and provided municipal services. The subject property is also located within the area of City of Post Falls exclusive tier. And this is a discussion that staff had with the applicant early on when we had a pre-application meeting and when they actually submitted the application. Pursuant to Kootenai County Land Use and Development Code, Title 8, Article 10.7, the exclusive tier requires that the county agrees to apply infrastructure and subdivision development standards identical to those of their respective cities to all development within the exclusive tier. That's under subsection 1. And then under subsection 4, the county agrees to require all development to use public sewer and public water systems to meet all fire flow requirements. When it says all development, it hasn't been determined by our director as well as our legal counsel that all development implies anything that's more intense than by right uses, such as residential uses on site. So anything that requires a conditional use permit or a special notice permit would have to adhere to the requirements of the ACI agreement. What does that mean? What that basically implies is that property has to be provided those services, i.e. be incorporated or annexed into the city limits. And this is something that we expressed to the applicant. Now, this is a very similar request as you heard recently in the exclusive tier of City of Post Falls a few months ago. In this case, the applicant has actually attempted to annex the property on a couple different occasions, I believe in 2019 and 2022, and the city declined to annex the property at that time. When we solicited comments from the City of Post Falls, they advised us that the proposal conflicts with the ACI standards and should be denied. And they did acknowledge and confirm that the applicant submitted an annexation request recently on 2 different occasions. But their request both times was to annex the property with medium or higher density residential development, which would likely be apartment complexes. But they did not contemplate having the property be annexed as a storage unit facility. And so it seems to us that that would have been something that may perhaps would have been approved through the annexation, but we don't know. It was brought to our attention that the annexation process did not contemplate the use that's being proposed in the county. They did acknowledge that restroom facilities would be required, meaning that it would have to connect to a public sewer system. And that if the development were to be approved, that it would have to comply with the Post Falls Municipal Code requirements for road dedication, landscaping, screening, buffering, and so forth. And so this is typically a response that we get, that we do not wish to have this property be approved, but if it does happen, then these regulations should apply. We did solicit comments from other agencies, including the Highway District, Fire District, our Building Divisional Health Department, Idaho Department of Water Resources, Ross Point Water, as well as in DEQ. And everybody seemed to be on board. Nobody seemed to have any issue as long as they complied with the certain conditions of approval, with the exception of City of Post Falls. We advised the applicant early on, and I stated this to Mr. Dittman, that if the city were to acknowledge the ACI requirements but were to waive them, that it's likely that the county would submit a favorable recommendation to the hearing examiner as well as the board. However, if the city were to decline and recommend denial and basically request that we adhere to the ACI requirements, then in that case, we would be compelled to recommend denial as well, which is the case today. We did receive a few comments, two in opposition, one in support, and one with comments but no position. In our analysis, we discuss how the project does not comply with the ACI or is in conflict with the ACI requirements, and how the city encourages that we adhere to the ACI regulations. The proposal is not compatible with the applicable standards of the code. Services and facilities to the proposal are not available or adequate. The proposal will not meet the duly adopted requirements of other agencies such as City of Post Falls, and that the proposal is in conflict with the comprehensive plan. Basically, it's being developed at such intensity that it would require municipal services which are not available unless it's annexed. For the reasons I just stated, we recommend denial of their request. However, we always want to make a disclaimer that notwithstanding staff's position, if the hearing examiner is inclined to recommend approval of this proposal, that the request be remanded back to our department for further analysis so that we could put appropriate conditions of approval to mitigate impacts with the assistance of the City of Post Falls. As it stands today, we did not prepare any conditions because it doesn't appear that there is any ongoing dialogue to sway the city to change their position. And so we took a strong stance on this matter to recommend denial at this time. If you have any questions, I can answer them at this time.
Sure, thanks for your presentation. Guess there's a couple topic areas I want to dig into. And I guess understanding the last point you made. I guess I'll just go into them in the order I've got it, so I might jump around a little bit. I guess first I want to acknowledge that this is a unique situation, and I've held a hearing for this property before, and it looks like that request was denied as well. I didn't go back and look at my files, but I think it was for a multifamily or some sort of subdivision.
I don't believe this property was part of.
I might be mixing this up with one that's nearly identical, so I guess maybe I shouldn't say that, but
There was a very similar request that was done by Mr. Hughes recently within the last few months. It was off of Meyer Road. In that case, the application was also for a mini storage facility, and we did have a recommendation for denial. But at that time, we understood that the applicant was working behind the scenes with the City of Post Falls to try to come up with a solution such as a consent to annex agreement. At that time, that only the result of, or the agreement only came into fruition right up the day before the hearing. So we were not prepared to change our position. We recommended denial. However, subsequently, following your hearing, we did confirm that the city was not opposed, and they changed their position with a consent to annex agreement. And then as it moved forward to the Board of County Commissioners, the board reversed the recommendation at that time, and with a consent to annex agreement, they approved the matter. I don't know how much relevance it has to this case, except for it's in the ACI, but the conditions were slightly different, being that we understood that there was some negotiation moving forward. We're not aware of that at this time with this project.
all right, then apologies, that was my mistake for mixing these up. I was getting a bit of deja vu. All right, so I guess just real quick, going back before I get to some more hypotheticals. So as far as follow, like the first requirement where they have to follow all of the infrastructure and subdivision standards of the city, would that apply all standards? Like you're gonna just take Post Falls code and apply it for screening, buffering, everything, or is that limited to infrastructure and subdivision standards?
So it wouldn't be subdivision standards because this is not a subdivision request. This is a land use application. I understand, and based on the comments we got from the Post Falls Highway District, is that there would be a potential requirement to require dedication of additional right-of-way along 16th Avenue. As you know, typically the county cannot require dedication of right-of-way through a land use application. We can only do that through a subdivision process because there's really no plat to go with a land use application to enforce that. However, what we have seen before is that a consent to annex agreement is a mechanism to enforce dedication of additional right-of-way, which took place on a similar request just recently, as I mentioned to you a few minutes ago. So there would be some dedication of right-of-way through a consent to annex agreement if that were agreed upon between the applicant as well as the city of Post Falls. Furthermore, there would be a requirement for landscaping, screening, and buffering according to the city of Post Falls municipal code. What would happen if the applicant were to come up to an agreement and we received a subsequent or a follow-up response from the city of Post Falls, we would implement those requirements as a condition of approval in our recommendation to you or the Board of County Commissioners, if you were to remand this back to staff for further review.
Right, so that's how it would come in through a condition to follow the Post Falls
Yes.
standards for development.
Correct.
Okay.
But we don't know. I think it would be prudent for you to ask Mr. Dittman to address that if he's been actively seeking to come up with a resolution with the city of Post Falls. We are not aware of it, but I think it's prudent that you ask him that.
Okay. And as far as, what if there was a condition that said you have to connect to city sewer before you can begin development?
I don't think that would be the case. What I believe would happen is that the city would require that the applicant construct a dry sewer line in location as agreed upon with the city of Post Falls for future connection when annexation takes place. I think that's typically the case, as a dry sewer line. And I think that is reasonable if that is something that the city would request.
Okay, thanks. And again, for bearing with me, I'm trying to think outside the box a little bit. You know, in that regard, what would be another alternative for the applicant here? What about a comp plan amendment? Is that just really thorny because of the ACI and the exclusive tier agreement?
A comp
Right, get it out of the border designation, let's say.
A comp plan agreement would not have, it would not supersede the ACI agreement standards. A comp plan is merely a guide or a tool that we use to address intensity of development as it relates to border designation or transitional designation. I think the other option would be, so option one would be for you to consider denial as requested by staff. Option two would be to remand the matter to staff to have the applicant work with the city to come up with the conditions and come back before you so that you can readdress those conditions. And the other option is you could also recommend that the applicant recommend denial and request that the applicant apply for annexation, for a third annexation with the intent to develop the project as a mini storage facility rather than a medium to higher density development, which would indicate like an apartment complex. Those are the thoughts that I have. Maybe perhaps Director Callahan or Mr. Dittman could provide additional options.
Mr. Callahan, did you want to chime in on that? I'm also curious about just how you could amend the exclusive tier agreement or ACI agreement, or I'm just looking for other avenues here.
As you know better than most, an ACI amendment requires both parties to agree. There's no indication whatsoever that the city is willing to amend their ACI or to even open negotiations along those lines. In my view, the only reason to remand this to staff is if you're inclined to approve it. I hope you've seen sufficient information that shows that you should recommend denial.
I do want to state on the record that we did receive 3 days ago a follow-up response from the city of Post Falls. It's in the record. I can introduce it if you'd like, but this is something that we find to be, it came in after the closing of the public comment period. And so I don't know if you would like me to address it.
So that's not in the file that I got?
It's not in the file. It came in late.
And what was that?
So there is a follow-up state or response from the city of Post Falls that came in on Friday of last week. And basically, the city still stands by their position to deny their request. But if there is a chance that the city or that the county would approve this, there is a list of conditions that would need to be considered. But the bottom line is that the city clearly state they still recommend denial. So if you were to recommend approval, we could go back and revisit this with the Post Falls, the city of Post Falls, to come up with the conditions that would address future impacts.
Okay,
Mr. Hearing Examiner,
sure.
I'm going to take a rather bold position for a moment, because our job as staff is not to find ways to shoehorn in development. Our job is to review it in accordance with law. We've done that. We think this case should be denied. That's really the long and short of it.
Thank you for the comment. Just one more question.
Yes,
Hopefully
sir.
it's not pushing in the direction you're pushing back on. But I guess if the applicant goes for a third annexation request and they're denied again, what is a property owner supposed to do, I guess? You know, they're in a designation that prohibits them from developing in a way that would be allowed anywhere else in the county. And the city that they're bordering doesn't want to annex them and doesn't want to give them the utilities. It kind of frustrates that purpose.
There are uses allowed on this property that do not require any review by staff, meaning you can do by right uses. That's all the law requires. And so again, our job's not to find ways to shoehorn things in. In my view, they've got ample opportunities for reasonable development of this property. They just, at the moment, don't seem to be able to work things out with the city to do a more intensive development. That's not at all unusual, and having looked at these things since 1980, I can tell you that it's common practice around the country to encourage development that's immediately adjacent to a city, if it's going to be more intense, to annex. That's just a standard rule of practice.
Great. Thank you for your comments. You want to read it, or we can just make it a part of?
I can just make it a part, or I can add.
Yeah,
Just-
give it an exhibit.
Yeah, let's just put it as an exhibit number and we'll make it part of the record.
City of Post Falls email read into the record as HE 1001.
All right, well, that's enough for me now. I'd like to hear from the applicant. Thank you, Mr. Finkel and Mr. Callahan. All right, we have Drew Dittman, the representative for the applicant.
Thank you, Mr. Hearing Examiner. For the record, Drew Dittman, Lake City Engineering, 126 East Poplar Avenue in the great city of Coeur d'Alene, Idaho. First, I guess I would just want to state my objection to entering that in the record. We haven't even seen it and I haven't had a chance to review it. I have no idea what's in that letter from the city of Post Falls. So,
Okay, your objection is noted. It will be part of the record, so you'll be able to get a copy of it.
so a lot of what I'm going to talk about, Vlad has already talked about, so forgive me, but I'm going to put my little spin or my little twist on it. If I may, again, project location just east of Highway 41, north of Interstate 90 on 16th Avenue. Here's a zoom in. As Vlad had said, you've got the Bell Cielo apartments that are right here, hence why this is called the Bell Cielo Storage Unit. It's the same owner that developed these apartment units to the west. It's the same property owner that did it. As I guess let me talk a little bit about the project first before I get into some other stuff. So we did propose this in two phases. First phase would retain the existing house, which you see here, would create a little parking lot out front and access to the rear of the property to develop 134 storage units of various sizes in the back. The second phase is a little more difficult, would require removal of the existing house, building of a new rental office, some additional parking, and then more storage units up front. Part of the county's code does require a landscape buffer, so it'd be a 15-foot landscape buffer on the sides and the rear, and there would be a 25-foot landscape buffer in the front. And I do want to touch on one point. You asked the question about city standards versus county standards if it were to get approved. I would just say that the county standards in this circumstance are actually a little more stringent than the city standards would be as it relates to landscaping and setbacks, for what that's worth. So here's the conditional use permit findings, and Vlad went through this, but I'm going to go through it again from our standpoint. A is procedural requirements have been met. That's a pretty easy one. Noticing requirements have been met. We've submitted all the application requirements. We're obviously standing in front of you tonight, so we've checked that box off. The proposal is in compliance with applicable standards for the use without variances or such variances that may be approved. Mini storage is allowed by conditional use in the agriculture zone in the county land use code. So that's why we're here to ask for a conditional use permit. As it relates to the city comprehensive plan designates this as business commercial. Business commercial has several different underlying or implementing zones that are allowed, all of which do allow for mini storage, except for one zone, the TM zone, the technology mix zone does not allow for mini storage, but there are 5 other zones that are allowed per city of Post Falls that do allow for mini storage.
Is it a CUP through the city, or
No,
are they
they're
just?
outright allowed uses. C, is the proposal compatible with homes, businesses, and natural characteristic? I'm gonna go back to my aerial image real quick, and as Vlad had explained, we do have multifamily to the west. We do have a high-density residential mobile home park to the south and to the east. And if you even back out a little bit more, here's Highway 41 that runs north. You have storage units here, you have storage units here, you have storage units here that are all in proximity to what we're proposing. So we do feel that it fits the characteristic of the surrounding property from that standpoint. Item D is the proposal adequately addresses site constraints, hazards, and adequately mitigates negative environmental, social impacts. There really aren't any environmental or social impacts due to mini storage. It's actually a very low intensive use compared to other uses that could be put on that property. So we don't feel that there are any issues there. Item E is services and facilities are available and adequate. And I think this whole issue really boils down to one issue, and that's sewer. And I'll get into that in a little bit. Public water is provided by Ross Point Water District. They have submitted a letter. They have adequate water supply to do it. They've got a 12-inch water line in 16th Street right in front of the project that could supply both domestic water and fire flows. So that's not an issue. Ross Point Post Falls Highway District maintains 16th Street. They've asked for some additional right-of-way in front of the project. They've asked us to apply for an approach permit. Those are all things that the applicant and the owner are willing to do. We're happy to dedicate additional right-of-way that can be done through a grant right-of-way. It does not need to be done through a subdivision process. We do it all the time with a grant of right-of-way. So we can meet those conditions as well. And then PhD actually weighed in on the sewer issue. There is an existing septic system on site. So here's the house here. There's an existing drain field just to the side of the house that serves the house. PhD did weigh in and say that with a change of use, they would approve that use for that existing septic system. All we'd have to do is file for the change of use. Item F is kind of the big one, is, do we meet the duly adopted requirements of other agencies? And as I said, with the exception of the City of Post Falls and the Area of City Impact Agreement, we feel that we do meet all of those, which I'll get into here in a minute. And then The last one is not in conflict with the comp plan. You know, the border designation, as Vlad said, is meant for low intense uses that could be or are compatible with the city that it's gonna get annexed to. And I would argue that mini storage is a very, very low intense use. You have very few people that travel to and from it daily. We're looking at 1 to 2 employees that would man that rental office. It does not generate a lot of water use. It does not generate a lot of traffic. It does not generate a lot of sewer. So it is a very, very low intense use from that standpoint. So we do feel it's in conformance with that part of the comprehensive plan. As it relates to the area of city impact agreement, it is in the exclusive tier. We're not arguing that. Items 2 and 3, and Vlad went through this, are really not applicable to this application. It's not a new subdivision. It's not a zone change. So those items aren't really applicable. Item 1, the county agrees to apply infrastructure and subdivision development standards. Again, it's not a subdivision, so we'd be looking at just the infrastructure standards identical to those from the respective cities. Again, water is provided by Ross Point. They've agreed to provide water. Post Falls Highway District has said, here's their conditions. They want right-of-way and approach permit. We're willing to do that. And Panhandle Health has said that the existing septic system is an allowable septic system to be used. So item 4 talks specifically about public sewer and public water. Again, public water is available, fire flow is available. So it really boils down to the public sewer. And I'm going to go back and talk about the annexations that we did. So we came in 2019, this developer to annex this property in to develop the 3rd phase of the Cielo apartment project. That was right when the Highway 41 construction had started. And we got through Planning and Zoning Commission in Post Falls unanimously. We had full support of the staff of Post Falls. We got in front of City Council and we were denied. And we were denied because Council claimed they wanted to see the Highway 41 project complete before they put additional traffic onto Highway 41. In particular, they were concerned about this intersection right here. Now, part of that Highway 41 improvements is there's a traffic signal here. Now you can see that's actually this big monster of an arm if you've driven down 41 and seen those monstrosities. So there is a traffic signal at 16th now. So when that was done in 2022, we came back to the city of Post Falls and asked for annexation again and said, you asked us to wait till 41's done. It's done. We'd like to annex. Again, we got through Planning Commission with a unanimous approval. We had full support of staff. We got in front of council and we were denied. And we were denied on the basis, and the comment was, now that the 41 corridor is complete, the city wanted to see all of this remaining property adjacent to the 41 corridor developed before they wanted to see this piece developed. Well, that could be 10 years, that could be 15 years, that could be 30 years before that's all developed. So as a landowner, like you said, what is our option? Well, we're trying to develop the property to the highest and best potential use that we can. And in the county, mini storage is an allowed use in that zone through the conditional use permit process. So that's why we're here. The city of Post Falls has made it very clear they're not interested in annexing this. I've talked at length with their planner. As a matter of fact, I talked to him about an hour ago before I came here again about this project. And he doesn't see, I don't want to speak for him, but I said, so if I brought it back in, John, would the city annex it? And he says, no, probably not. So that's why we're here tonight is to talk about that. Again, the big issue really is the sewer. And I'll even go as far as to say that the city couldn't actually sewer this property today anyways. The sewer is down here in 12th, on the south side of the mobile home park, and they do not have easements nor access through the mobile home park to get to this property.
How is the sewer connected to the apartments right now?
This goes out a different way. This sewer, per the city's master plan, has to come down to this sewer here in 12th Street. These apartments come this way and they join, there's a sewer line here in 41, but there's no gravity sewer here in 16th to get to it. So this would have to go to the south per their master plan. So I would argue that even though the city's requiring that public sewer be extended to it, that it's not practical. It couldn't be done because the city doesn't have the easements and the rights of way to do it. Another point I want to make is in the city's letter, they stated, and I did talk to John Manley about this today, that mini storage per city code requires the construction of a restroom. That's not entirely true. It's not in their city code that it requires a restroom. It's actually not even discussed in their code. It's actually a building code issue that if you have a rental office that has employees, you have to provide a restroom for those employees. It's not a public restroom, it's a restroom for those employees. So I just wanted to make that clarification. And again, we have an existing septic system that could service those employees. Panhandle Health has said, yes, you could file the change of use form to use that existing septic system for that use. Any questions for me at this point?
I will have some for you, but you can continue.
No, you know what, why don't you go ahead and ask?
I mean, I guess I'll just cut straight to it.
Yeah.
The county and the city have a contract,
Yep,
and the contract says the county is required to make sure you hook up to city sewer if you're in the border designation. That's the contract they have together. So you want the county to break that term of the contract?
I would argue that how do I hook up to a sewer that I can't hook up to? It's not there, the city can't service it. The city, it doesn't require, the use we're proposing doesn't require public sewer. We have a sewer use that's been approved by the agency that oversees that, Panhandle Health. So I would argue that we don't need to connect to public sewer with this use. That's why we're proposing the mini storage. If we came in and proposed something else that required public sewer, I actually agree with you on that, but the use we're proposing doesn't require public sewer.
And that may well be the case. And
Sure.
hypothetically, if this is somewhere else in the county, we obviously wouldn't be having this conversation
Correct,
at
yeah.
all. We'd be making sure all the proper conditions are in place. I guess I'm just looking for your perspective on what the county is supposed to do. I mean, I'm sure you'll show up before the board.
Again, it could be conditioned that when sewer is available, we'd hook up to it. If the city gets sewer available to that property, I don't want to speak for my client, but I'd be willing to say he'd hook up to it at that point if and when it's available. But for the city to come and say, we don't want to annex it, and we're going to prevent you from developing it in the county because we can't provide sewer to it, and we're going to require that you have sewer. Doesn't seem necessarily fair. We're trying to develop the property to the best use that we can, given the rules that are in place.
Indeed.
And you're right, it is a unique situation, and it's not an easy one, for sure.
Yeah, actually just lost my train of thought, but, we do get a lot of these applications that are in the border transitional, and we get no comment from the cities. Or just tacit approval, often no comments. Again, just given the prior agreements and the designation of this parcel, in my view, the county has obligations and stewardship to defer to the cities. And they're recommending denial.
Agreed. The recommend denial over sewer, which they can't provide.
That,
It's almost like a catch-22.
I understand the conundrum, and I guess I can understand why you're here trying to pursue this
Yeah, I mean,
anyway.
we're trying to develop the property to the highest and best use that we can. We tried with the city, they said no. Then they put conditions on it so that we couldn't develop it in the county. It doesn't seem fair to us. I'm not saying that the agreements shouldn't be, or should be waived, but you look at it and go, does the use we're proposing require public sewer? No, it does not.
Okay. And your prior annexation request was for further multifamily
For
development?
multifamily. Well, that's a logical extension. It's got multifamily to the west. It's got mobile home park to the east and a mobile home park to the south. To us, that seemed like
So was that denied because they didn't want to send the sewer line out that way?
officially it was denied because of Highway 41. Unofficially, it was denied, in my opinion, because the city of Post Falls doesn't want more multifamily. For whatever that's worth. and I do a lot of work in the city of Post Falls.
All right, that's all the questions I got for right now. Mr. Finkel, sir?
I did want to comment on Mr. Dittman's statements. We do have cases where we have unmanned storage facilities. They don't have an office where the clients can go in, everything is done online. All the transactions, all the payments are done online, and it's unmanned. They basically get a keypad and they're able to operate that way. But in this case, because they are proposing to retain the existing residence and use it as an office, and then following or after completion of phase one, they will develop with phase two and remove the office and rebuild it as a clubhouse and have a bathroom in it. We absolutely feel that a bathroom is necessary if they're going to continue with this type of development. Only unmanned facilities, from my experience, do not require a bathroom, but as soon as you put in an office, that is an automatic requirement. So I'm not sure if I fully understand Mr. Dittman's position, but they are proposing an office, so they do want to have a bathroom, or they have to have a bathroom because of the office space. Maybe he can clarify on that.
That is correct. Per building code, if you do provide the office, you have to provide the restroom facility for the employees. We did it because it's existing. The house is existing. It has the restroom facility. It has the existing septic. I would say that if it took us to tear down the house to have an unmanned facility to get approved, I'm fairly certain my client would go for that. We just, again, it was there. It was existing. It felt right for us to keep it that way.
All right, you can continue.
I don't think I have anything else unless there's further questions.
I mean, I guess I don't really have questions on the development as is proposed. As of, I don't want to beat a dead horse here.
Sure.
I'm just gonna have a hard time squaring the circle of the county's obligations under their contract with the city, and I can understand your frustration. I hope you can understand the county's
No, I
position as well as their
totally do.
obligations as well.
Again, I told you, you said it was a hard one to begin with, and I get it. It's tricky. It's not a normal one. And again, I would say if we need to look at doing an unmanned facility to get it approved, I would suggest that we could probably make that work.
Okay. Those are all the questions.
How that process would work, if we'd have to come back with a new proposal or whatnot, but that's something we would consider.
Okay. Anything else from the county staff?
Mr. Granrath, David Callahan, Community Development Director. I need to clear this with our legal counsel, but it just struck me that if we were to approve this, there's an argument from the city's side that we violated the ACI and they could sue us.
I don't know what that would look like as far as a legal case, but my understanding is that you guys have contractual obligations to each other. Perhaps
When you said that,
injunctive
that's what
relief,
made me go there. So I
which
just,
obviously needs to be avoided as well.
right. I think, to me, the bottom line here is highest and best use has nothing to do with land use planning. That's a real estate term. And land use planning is all about compatibility. The reason we have ACIs is to encourage compatibility next to cities so that when it's time to annex, it can be done seamlessly. I hope that helps.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, at this time, with the information and testimony I have, I'm not gonna remand it to county staff. I am gonna move forward with making my recommendation and, the applicant.
No one on Zoom.
And, oh, I forgot to ask, there's no one on Zoom. All right. So we'll move forward with making my recommendation to the county commissioners, and of course, as well, I reiterate this many times to everyone who's here, they're your ultimate decision makers on this case, and you can go and make the case in front of them too, as well as alert them to this situation. So, With that, without saying anything else off cuff, I'm gonna close tonight's hearing at 6:50 p.m. The record is now closed and the hearing for CUP 23-0009 is now closed. Thank you.